Hello, good morning everyone. Welcome to FORPROLI YouTube channel. My name is Suellen Thomaz. I am an English language professor at Federal University of Southern Bahia, UFSB, on campus Asígenes Costa in Porto Seguro, and general coordinator of extension program Language Educations. I'd like to welcome you to the second meeting of the project Let's Talk About Emotions, Talk with Experts, which is a joint action developed by the Applied Linguistics Research Group, GPLA, Emotions and Language Teachers Education, at Federal University of Viçosa, led by Professor Ana Maria Barcelos, by the Outreach Program on Language Teacher Education, FORPROLI, and the Federal University of Southern Bahia, and at least but not last, the group Language Teaching and Work Led Research Group at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, UERJ, led by Professor Gisele Colombo. I'd like to greet Professors Ana Maria Barcelos, Gisele Colombo, Givanildo Santos, our dear volunteers, Jamile Nascimento, Felipe Nunes, as well as all our participants who are here in the virtual room or on the YouTube with us. To introduce our speaker for this meeting and mediate the conversation, I invite Professor Ana Maria Barcelos, who is a professor at Federal University of Viçosa.
Thank you, Suellen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for being here in this session. Our guest today is Dr. Junyan Song. She's a professor in the TESOL programs at Murray State University, USA. She received a PhD in language, literacy, and culture, major area in foreign and second language education at the Ohio State University. Her research interests include language teaching and learning in its social-cultural context, particularly issues regarding language ideology, identity, and emotion. She currently serves as associate editor of TESOL Journal. So, Dr. Song, welcome. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We are very happy to have you here and very honored as well. So, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for joining me, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon if you are, on the other side of the globe. Today's the topic, continue focus on emotion. So my first question for you is, how are you feeling this morning? Okay, I pretend you are all excited. So, next, the topic, today's topic is critical approaches to emotion. So I aim to address three questions in this talk. The first question is, what are the critical approaches to emotions? The second one is, why do they matter? Why we have to learn about critical approaches to emotion? And number three, what are the implications for researchers and language teachers? When I talk about critical approaches, that means there are other approaches. So other approaches, traditionally more dominant approaches are cognitive, psychological, or socio-psychological approaches to emotion. So these perspectives focus on interrelationship between cognition and emotion. How, language teachers' cognition, their recognition, right? Influence their emotions. So the popular concept, used in these approaches include emotional intelligence or emotional literacies or positive psychology. So though there are so many wonderful studies, they focus on this particular area. And then those studies, contributed to language teachers' professional development and well-being by promoting emotional awareness, through emotional intelligence or emotional literacy, and also building resilience and the optimism through positive psychology by encouraging positive emotion. And also those studies call for strengthening support network for teachers' emotional well-being. So, great study from cognitive psychological approaches. Recently, more scholars are interested in the other approaches to emotion, which is the focus of today's talk, which is social approaches or post-structural approaches, or somebody called critical approaches. So here in my presentation, I'm going to call these approaches just critical approaches. So these approaches, critical approaches, somewhat different from my window here is a little bit somewhat different from the other mainstream approaches. It focuses on interrelationship between emotions and not the cognition, emotion and social context. For language teachers, social context included what? Institutional context, school context, teaching conditions, or policy, like a language policy, educational policy. Those are all included part of these social structures. And then they're looking at how those are social discursive construction of emotion. So they're not denying the personal or individual aspect of emotion. Of course, there are individual aspect of emotion. However, what they're saying is that emotions are socially discursively constructed rather than purely individual. It's not just a purely individual. So we have to look at individuals' interaction with the social context, how the social context influence individual teachers' emotional experiences. So, when we are talking about social, right? When we are talking about social, or when we talk about critical, the terms implied power dynamic, because no two people within the same social context have equal power. Always the powers are up and down, up and down. So when we're talking about critical approaches, we are thinking about different teaching contexts, institutional policy, and also power inequality, how those influence language teachers' emotional experiences. And then what does that mean? Different emotional experiences. Okay, next slide. I'm jumping. Too many. I clicked something. There are too many. Yeah. Do you still see this? What if I close down this? Yes. Something happened. I'm still online, right? Okay. Yes. I'm gonna close down. So as I said, when we talk about critical social, it's a power dynamic and emotion. So we are talking about uneven emotional experiences. Individuals experience emotion differently because based on their social position. Think about your supervisor or administrators versus you, right? So there are different emotional experiences. And then why that matter, right? Emotional experiences, because that means emotion is related teacher identity, and also teacher identity play a very important role in teachers' practices, teaching practices. That's one thing. Another one is once you experience uneven emotional experiences, that goes beyond emotion. So think about here, emotional capital. Emotional capital is somewhat like a money value, so we talk about what kind of social relationship that I have. So if I know somebody very in a higher power, then that may lead to better career opportunity and so on. So that's a social capital. But then Bourdieu was talking about our emotions has also capital value. So first, think about those, people who have like high confidence and very positive, emotion versus some other who experience higher anxiety and low confidence. Then they have a different capital value, and it may lead to different, career opportunity, social networking. So for example, I'm just always, suffering from this lower confidence. I mean, still do, and like a higher anxiety. Then I have a very low willingness to talk to somebody in a professional setting. So that may limit my, career opportunity. So it just all related to, what we do here. So like this is an example. This is my very first study that focused on teachers' emotions. So my earlier study, I used to work with the Korean families who, who came to US and stay there for a while for their children's English learning when they're very young. So this kind of phenomena, whole family, they moved to English speaking country to give a better opportunity, for their children to learn English early. That was very popular, 10 years, 20 years ago. So I was working with a Korean family who stayed for short term in the US. So I wanted, once they returned to Korea, I wanted to follow up with those children, once they return, how they maintain or learn or improve their English skill. So I went to school in Korea. I interviewed the Korean English teachers, how those students are doing. Students means who study abroad, when they're young, and then they return to Korea. So I was asking those teachers about those students, how those students are doing in your classroom. They participate well, or do they perform well, and so on. When I asked those questions, English teacher in Korea, they all of a sudden they talk about their emotions like this. So these are some example. Teacher here, I feel extremely uncomfortable. I didn't ask you your emotion. I was asking how those students are doing. I feel extremely uncomfortable. And then, I will read just a highlighted part here. It's hard for me to endure and get through the, class emotionally. The entire year, I felt sorry for the students, and I felt shame for not being able to control myself. Another teacher also talked about, I feel a sense of shame by myself. I feel very embarrassed. So those teachers are very experienced teachers, and they had so many different teacher training. And also some of them are like selected, good teacher, best teacher in their school district. So this kind of emotional expression, feel anxiety, high anxiety, and then shame, were kind of common among those group of teachers. I was thinking, wow, where these emotions, came from, right? I don't know in Brazil, in Korea, it's very difficult to become a teacher in Korea because it's very competitive. No, so in Korea, it's very competitive to be a teacher. So it's literally you have to be top of the class to become a teachers. And also you sometimes, because it's a very few spot, so you have to wait a few years to be a teacher after you graduate. So it's like that. So those teachers are, like a very good student when they're a student, when they're in school. And the so many different training and experienced teacher. So it was just so kind of, wow, why this anxiety? So it looks like they all share this feeling of anxiety and shame, right? So then I felt like this is not individual. It's more like things they all experience kind of together, collectively. So I analyze it, what happened. So like, there are individual aspect and social aspect. So some teacher, they have this, confidence that's from individual aspect, professional knowledge, and then pedagogies and teaching experiences. But then the prevalent language ideology in Korean society, English skills are so important in Korea. So we call the English fever. So, push everybody to speak better English. So that's sort of a language ideology. And then also the educational policy. Teachers have to teach English through English. So they only have to use English to teach English. So that's sort of pressures. And then also culture aspect. In Korean society, traditionally teachers' role, teachers are considered know everything, master of everything. So, the view of a teacher as all knowing, all together kind of, influence those teachers, emotion. So I shouldn't speak English better than student because I am teacher. If I don't speak English better, then I feel shame. I have to feel shame because I must speak English better, or perfect English. That's sort of a societal expectation and norms. So that, guide those teachers' emotional experiences. So when it comes to socially constructed norm, right? So probably what is shame in Brazilian context may be different. What is shameful in Korean context? Because of what? Culture influence, right? There are some common elements, but there are different elements, right? So socially constructed norms and the expectation that guide how individual should feel, in different situations. So when we are young, we are socialized, by our parents, that's a shame. You shouldn't do that. You feel shame, don't do it. So what? Okay, that's a shameful thing. So I shouldn't do it. We kind of learn, right? Those kind of emotions. And how they express emotion too, what kind of emotion we can express. In certain contexts, younger people are not allowed to express their emotions, right? And there's some other context, it's kind of some gender related, females like, not allowed to show like, frustration in front of other member. So all sort of different social norms guide our emotional experiences. So those kind of social norms are, theorized, conceptualized as feeling rules by Hochschild. So feeling rules. So we have rules for our behavior. Same way we have rules for our emotion. So to be a good person in that context, we have to follow these rules. So that applied to teacher. You wanted to be professional or good teacher, we follow rules, feeling rule, specifically designed for teacher, right? So for example, what is a good teacher? Well, good teacher care for their student, caring, feeling of this caring. So, okay, if your teacher, your school, enforce, okay, caring, teachers are caring so much, then every teacher have to follow that norm. And what do? Okay, I care for my student. I should care for my student. Then you work 24/7, and then you kind of provide a support, even like beyond the classroom, because you wanted to show your care for your student. So those kind of emotion is related to not just emotion, but your action, because in order to feel care for your students, we have to do things, right? We have to do things. So that's why it's important. So feeling rules, the social norms, guideline that dictate or guide, I would say guide, not dictate. Dictate sounded too strong. Guide how individuals should feel and express emotion in specific situation. So feeling rules, who set up, who create these feeling rules, right? Feeling rules are constructed through language and discourse and are not fixed. Typically, feeling rules are created by those who have a power. You know what I mean? Those who have a power, and then those who do not have a power, they have to follow the feeling rules. And then these feeling rules also change, over time. And, where can we see these feeling rules? Oftentimes, these are very implicit. They are produced and reproduced through cultural narrative. Cultural narrative, when we see everywhere, okay, women should show what kind of emotion, gratitude, or teacher have to show like a care for students, always have to be positive, and those kind of things, or media, institutions, everyday interactions. So that are feeling rules. So, like I said, feeling rules are about our emotion. However, feeling rules are not about just the emotions, because in order to feel that way, what do? We organize our actions. So it is considered one of the powerful tools here, as Hochschild said, one of the powerful tools for directing one's actions according to the social, cultural, institutional convention. So this is what we as the parents do, when we socialize our children. Oh, that's shameful, don't do it. No, so that kind of thing. I'm so proud of you. Oh, good job, proud of you. So they, that kind of feeling, right? So in order to be proud, I have to do that kind of thing. So feeling rules are not about just emotions. It actually direct our actions. Right. Then why is it so important? I mean, feeling rules are there. We wanted to follow the rule to be a good person, or whatever, good citizen or good teacher. Well, the issue is that feeling rules do not apply to everybody evenly. So that means emotions are experienced differently depending on one's social position. So who you are, race, gender, class, and age. So certain feeling rules apply to me, but then it doesn't apply to someone else. So for example, I'm working, at a U.S. Institutions. I'm an Asian female, not native English teacher. So a lot of feeling rules may apply to me, and so I have to be very careful how I express my emotion. Even like some kind of a silly joke, I have to be careful about it, because I'm minority here. But then some of those feeling rules are very flexible for some other members, some other faculty. They can express their emotion more freely, right? So it's kind of a intersectionality. My different identity and feeling rule, they interact. So that lead to inequality. Some people have to really follow that feeling rules. So, for example, teacher have to show care, okay? But then some other people, oh, it's okay. I can, students, the students are fine. So that sort of thing, right? So Hochschild here noted that feeling rules entail unequal power dynamic and serve to maintain and reproduce the status quo. So especially institution, school impose some sort of feeling rule, teachers need to follow, so that what? They can control teachers' action. in a way. So, I mean, that's not bad, but the teacher have to be aware of, those kind of feeling roles. So now the popular term appeared, emotional or emotion labor. Emotion labor. So what means is, so there are feeling roles here, and then the work of managing one's emotions by suppressing felt emotions and presenting emotion mandated by social institutional feeling roles. So for example, your school, okay, you always have to care for your student. But then you ran across very difficult student, travel, student. How do you feel? Well, I know I have to, care for my student, but I have this struggle, these students are this close to fail my class, but then, my school, told me to care for students, don't fail, care for their mental health and stuff. So you're struggling. So you try to show care, but then suppressing your frustration when you interact with that student. That happened, right? So that's sort of a management. You're managing your true feeling of felt emotions versus what kind of emotion you have to show, display. There's a gap. Then we engage emotional labor. We have to maintain, suppress these emotions, and then show the other emotion. So that's emotional labor, right? So when we engage emotional labor, we sometimes do surface acting. Surface acting means, this person, I'm not so much, into this person, but you want to show very positive, emotion. So that's a very surface acting. The other one is deep acting is, so caring, right? Caring for a student. Well, I understand that's a good, aspect of, being a good teacher. So I try to really follow it. I will really, really try. I try to feel that way. I try to feel that way. That's more like a deep acting. Make effort to induce the actual emotion, not just, I feel this way, I just show the other. Try to really care for this student, right? More struggle, right? So the second deep actings lead to a closer alignment between emotion and action. You know what I mean? Emotion and action, highlighting the effect of a feeling in directing action. So later, Manish talked about emotional labor, and she talked about the relationship between emotion and unequal power. She bring out the power inequality more explicitly, and she also talked about resistance and teacher agency. Because it's a power structures. So teacher aware of those power inequality, and that way teacher can enact their agency to resist, negotiate, certain feeling rules, and so on. So that's emotion labor. So there are various studies on emotion labor. Emotion labor probably has been one of the most popular concept from this critical or social approaches to emotion, right? So emotion labor. So there are many, many great studies. Oh, that include my studies here. So many, many great studies here talk about how the institutional policy versus language teachers' emotion labor, or care practices, and all those cultural expectation, and then teachers' emotion labor. So all these studies here, these example studies, they talk about individual versus social, and then also unequal power. power. So emotional labor is not just emotional burden or just management of emotion. Management of emotion is actually the other term. Emotional intelligence works better, just management of emotion. Emotion labor, when you work with emotion labor, you have to go beyond individual aspect. You have to look at social context and what kind of feeling rules influence individuals' management of emotion. Right. So I read I reviewed the various study. Sometimes the author used the term in a very limited way. Emotional labor is not just emotional management. You always have to think about social, uh, the power or the feeling rules, right? So we talk about emotional labor, feeling rules. Why does it matter? Does it matter? The core issue is a dynamic interplay between power and emotion, which can either empower teachers or constrain teachers. So there are certain emotional feeling rules. Teacher feel that's not fair. Those rules are not fair. Like care for student 24/7, unfair, right? We cannot care for our student 24/7. We cannot care for student beyond the classroom. But there's emotional, feeling rule like that. It's unfair, but then you just have to follow. Then really constrain language teacher and then lower teacher emotional well-being, right? So here scholars talks about the consequences of emotional labor. Two aspect. When you engage emotional labor, you kind of suppress your felt emotion, try to show the other emotions. The first one is it leads to teacher burnout and isolation because you cannot talk about it. You feel, something differently, but then the rule said, okay, you have to show positive emotion always. You have to smile to your student. You have to be always, caring for your student. Then you cannot talk about your true emotions and then isolate it and burn out and then eventually fall out. I quit. I cannot do this anymore. The other aspect is it can provide professional development opportunity. Wow, that's really positive. So how can we reach that professional development opportunity? Through critical inquiry, on one's own emotion. While teachers' understanding of their own emotion is crucial. So what do you mean by critical inquiry on one's emotion? You have to think about your emotion. So I feel terrible today. Why? Well, think why certain thing happened. I feel that's unfair and it didn't work, and so on. So that's a teacher's awareness on their own emotion. That's good. That's a good starting point. But researchers said in order to have a professional development through the emotion, that's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. What do you need to do is teacher must be able to discern how their experiences and management of emotions are directed, related to social professional assumption regarding what is appropriate. So they have to relate their emotion with their teaching condition or some other social factors. Then they realize it, okay, I feel this way. It's not because my lack of a skill. It's not because of my lack of a, English competence. Like going back to Korean teachers example, they feel the teacher expressed they feel shame, right? All the time, and they experience high anxiety. Many teachers think that, okay, they don't have a perfect English proficiency. That's why they felt that way. But in fact, it's not. It's a social expectation. So once teacher realized that, okay, it's not because of my lack of skills or strategies or lack of training. There are some other social factor that influence my emotion that may lead to professional development, and then they can take action what they can do about it if that social factor bothered them so much. So through that understanding, social context, how that influences one's emotion, teachers can enact their agency, and the teacher can also resist those unequal feeling rules that limit their identity and then their teaching practices. Then how can we reach that? How can we reach this? That sounds very good. We wanted to have professional development instead of isolated or instead of teacher burnout. How can we get there through critical emotional reflexivity? Critical emotional reflexivity means teacher reflect their own emotions. That's a first stop, but then go beyond the first stop. They have to look at social connections, how their emotion is related to social structures, some language policies. So the other day I was talking to one of my students. She felt terrible. Why you feel terrible? Well, I cannot do my job very well. Why do you think you cannot do your job? I mean, you're a great student, great teacher. I mean, she's one of my best students, and that she really cares for her students, and that she's a great teacher, but she just feel so not happy because she wanted to do this, but she cannot do it. And then I was asking, why do you think you cannot do what you want to do? Then she was thinking about it. She was answering, well, because there's no ESL policy that limits, student, number of students per ESL teacher. So some year she has 20 students, but then this year, she has 55 students that she need to, work with. So 55 students means like too many students. She can only work with each of a student 15 minutes or 20 minutes per day. She felt she cannot do her job with that policy. Due to the policy, she felt every day she felt she's failing her job because she couldn't do it. So that is related to the policy, because they just increase the student number every year because there's no policy. So there's some kind of policy for other content area, per teacher 20 student, per teacher 25 student, but then there's no policy for ESL teacher. So we kind of working about that, so now why you feel so terrible. It's not because of your lack of skills. It's kind of you're in that situation. So what can you do? So then she was going to address certain thing she will talk to her principal about how she can better spend her time with those students. So that's a critical emotional reflexivity. So you have to really think about your emotions and then locate your emotion within your teaching condition. So that's the critical approaches. Then challenges for critical inquiry on emotion. Can everyone reach that point, right? So that's a good question. Well, it's very difficult because in teacher education context, we rarely talk about our emotions because we focus on skill, teacher knowledge base, strategies. We are busy learning all those other teaching methods, material development, and so on. So we rarely talks about emotion, and emotions are also kind of taboo because we wanted to be rational teacher, not emotional, right? Teacher. So that's kind of so when I ask my students, okay, let's talk about your emotion, then they start talking about their students. So their reflection is always centered around, skill development. So for example, these recent studies, I work with language teachers about their emotions. And then, when we talk about emotion, the first thing they always come up to me is what? How to motivate my students. That's my, emotional challenge, how to motivate my student. So, I have to do this, I have to do that. So I was telling them, well, you're not focusing on your emotion. You're still talking about your student and then how to, better motivate them. So that's a kind of typical reflection practices in teacher education. So we have to think about the institutional context. Always reflection is, okay, I feel a little bit bad, but then eventually I did this, I feel better. So this is what I should do to have this positive feeling, So that's kind of reflective practices, institutionalized in reflective practices that also direct our reflective practices. So that's a kind of challenge. So how we can bring things out from our student or teachers, and then they can really reflect on their emotion, and they can understand their emotion and where those emotions are, coming from. So in this study, I used the two methods. One is, teachers' self-reflective narratives. Like every week or every the other week or every month, you write up, your reflection, but not general reflections, but then very specific area about, some event, emotion about some event, and so on. And then sometimes we also have to push those teachers to go further. So I usually, utilize it critical dialogue after the reflect. We go over the reflective narratives, and I ask a question, and then, how do you feel? Why do you feel that way? And those kind of things. So, for example, reflective questions should be very specific about certain topic. So, for example, these are some of those questions that I use. Here in red, how might this feeling? You feel happy or unhappy or disappointed. How might these feelings be related to your social linguistic background, right? Because who you are, we are talking about intersectional identity. Be related your social and linguistic background, relationship with the student, colleague, the school policies. You have to really think about that. Right. So, for example, here the last study here, Song and Valentine, 2024. Here, Valentine is one of my former students, but she's also ESL teacher. So once she started teaching at school, she felt that collaborating with the other teachers was the most challenging task for her. She said, how to collaborate, because she learned how to teach. That we train her well in the program. But when she actually start working, how to collaborate means ESL in the US is ESL teacher have to work with other content area teachers, scheduling, pull the student out and the testing, all those things, constantly talking to the other teacher and then asking the information. But then she felt that she's very nervous about talking, other teacher. And then why that nervous? Why she's so nervous? Because she is doing her job. Because she felt that her position as an ESL teacher is not recognized as professional teachers. Some of those content area teachers consider her as a tutor, English tutors or teacher's aide, although she's a legitimate professional of teachers. So due to that sort of a view and her social position at school, whenever she needs to talk to or ask her something, she feels very uncomfortable and they experience high anxiety. That we talk about this, where does her anxiety coming from? It's how ESL ESL teacher is a position at school, power, imbalance and so on. So that's a question to consider. As a teacher, I have to think about why I feel very upset today, why I feel very disappointed. Is it related to what I did, or related to some other social issues? That's just something we have to think about. What about the researchers? Language researchers, in terms of this, when they research emotion from this social or critical perspective, researchers should avoid misconceiving emotion labor as merely emotional management. I talked about this earlier. Emotional management is just emotional intelligence. Emotional labor is always related to the social context and the power inequality. That should be part of it. And also, researchers should move beyond the dichotomy that frame emotion as inherently problematic, emotion versus, rationality. It's not dichotomy, right? It's kind of interrelated. And then the last one, researchers should acknowledge the complexity and the context dependence of emotions, avoiding simplistic and binary categorizations of emotion as strictly positive and negative. Emotions from critical perspectives are not positive or negative, because negative emotions sometimes, might this a struggle that actually lead to professional development, right? So we have to look into the emotion and then how that influences the teacher identity and practices given context, rather than list, okay, what are the positive emotions, what are the negative emotions? What's wrong with just label them positive and negative? What's wrong with it? Well, if you are a researcher, you are just labeling someone else emotion. For example, here, Professor Barcelos, okay, you have a negative emotion, you have a positive emotion. Then what happened is a simplicity approach like this to emotion may lead to stigmatize, of a certain emotional experiences, and compelling language teacher to suppress and conceal them rather than critically engage with and then understanding them. So once we call that negative emotion, Professor Barcelos, okay, she experienced frustration. Okay, that's negative. Then she's not trying to show that frustration. She just suppressed that frustration, and what? That will have a negative, consequences, because she never understand why she felt that way. The researchers never understand, that sort of frustration at all. Thus, this in turn can hinder teachers' ability to engage in meaningful reflections and professional development. Moreover, it risks constraining researchers and educators' understanding of the complex interplay between emotions, cognitive processes, identity, and agency, inadvertently reinforcing existing social institutional norms. That means what? Once you call, okay, that's negative, then we are creating our own emotional, our own feeling rules. Okay, that's negative. Oh, negative? Then probably I shouldn't have this, emotion. And they are trying to induce, only positive emotion. So as a result, this can perpetuate cultures where only so-called positive emotions are recognized and validated. So then what about different individuals? Earlier I talked about different individuals have different experiences. Because my social identity, I experience more negative emotions in my working condition than other, for example, American faculties. For example, I'm not saying always, the example, as a minority, I always had a more negative emotion than other faculty member. Then my emotions are not validated because it's negative, it's bad emotions, and then further marginalize, my experiences and then my position through this, labeling. Okay, that's negative, right? It's okay to research a positive, negative emotion, and then you have to detail and how that influence, or related to identity and practices in a given situation. I'm talking about just labeling them. Okay, what are the positive emotion? Tick, tick, tick. What are the negative emotion here? Done, right? Right, something like that. We should avoid that. So researching emotion labor. So, those who are interested in this notion, this is a great, concept, emotion labor. Yes. The Benish and the Pryor suggest that research on emotion labor should pay attention to the unequal power, because the whole notion is, social, right? Critical. Therefore, when you talk about emotional labor, it's not just emotional work. Always, why teachers experience emotional labor due to the language policy, top-down language policy, right? Educational policy, or administrators, views, or some other rules or cultural norms that influence. So you have to talk about those with emotion labor. So what are these are their questions from the Benish and the Pryor. What are the repercussions of promoting some emotion as a good for teaching and others as bad? Who decide, who benefit, and who pays the price? Probably you know the answers. So this is my last slide. So the critical perspectives are all about emotion as a sticky object. So intimately tied to social context. Emotion is tied to social context wherever it goes, as they are shaped by cultural norms, values, and power relationship. So our emotion is just sticky. It's all shaped, sticky. It's no shape, but then it's shaped by culture, norm, value, and power relationship, and it's attached to anything. So that's critical perspectives, or interrelated. It's not. It goes beyond individual experiences. Of course, there are individual aspects, but then individual and social context. Okay, this is my last slide.
Thank you very much, Young. Excellent talk. I mean, so wonderful to hear all these complex concepts being explained in such a clear way and in such an organized talk, and and giving us so many insights and feedback, about our work, what we can do as language teacher educators and as teachers as well. So thank you so much. It has given me a lot of food for thought, and in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned the situation in Korea, that, becoming a teacher is so competitive. And I think I typed here in the chat that it's not like that in Brazil, actually, and we are experiencing a teacher shortage. It's very hard in some contexts, to be a teacher in Brazil, so not many people want to become teachers here. And when you mentioned about emotional vulnerability and shame and anxiety, in some contexts here, this is related to the belief in the native speakerism. Native speakers speak best, and we have to speak like them. So a lot of my students, for instance, sometimes they have this belief and feel this shame and inferiority because they want to sound native. So this is something that is very common here. But I think our research here, we have a lot of good research here on emotions, and some of them are in the decolonial approach, critical approach to emotions. Suellen, for instance, just defended her PhD thesis on decoloniality and language teaching education. So we have all these issues on power here as well. But anyways, I can talk about this later. We might have some questions from the audience. We had some comments on YouTube, and we don't know exactly when they were made, but some of the comments were from Eduardo. He works in Japan. He's Brazilian. I've heard similar experiences from colleagues working in the private sector in Brazil. Social class also comes into play when it comes to emotional discourses. Yes, so in Brazil, social class is something that counts a lot when we are talking about emotions as well. Professor Inês Miller from Rio de Janeiro, she made a comment, highly culturally constructed emotions. Elicintia Vieira, a PhD student, she said, we have to care about our students and their emotions, but we also have to care about ourselves as teachers. And then Eduardo mentioned again, some students on emotional labor focus solely on surface and deep acting strategies rather than considering the broader social context in which that management takes place. So these were some of the comments that they made. I don't know if you want to comment or anything on these comments. And then if anybody has more questions, you can type on YouTube. This is the moment for you to ask your questions.
Right. So I think that's a wonderful comment, especially the one example in Japanese context in Japan, talk about social class, how they influence language teachers' emotion. So I think I have an example about this. During COVID, so all Korean English teachers, they go online and then they have to teach online. And many teachers, they reluctant to show up in the live setting or record. They are just so sad. No, they have like fear for recording the session. It's because the parent, if once they record it, then the parents show up, because the parents are like, they are criticize, they kind of emphasize the teacher's pronunciation so much, and they kind of criticizing teacher pronunciation or teaching skill, or if there's any tiny error, they're kind of, calling the school and everything. So that kind of raised so much anxiety for the teacher. So they have to care for student, but then they have to make this online teaching for the first time. So that's a kind of social class. If the teacher is teaching in a more like affluent area, the parents are more like, interested in students learning, and their teachers are fearful, and then they cannot do anything. They don't have agency about what they are doing, and then so on. So I think social class is very important, student social class, and then also teachers on social class that also influence teachers' experience emotion. I think that's very relevant here. And then thank you so much for the comments.
Yes, thank you, Junyoung. And we have a question here actually related to what I said. Professor Inez Miller said, Ana Maria, don't you think that we have gone beyond this native speakerism in Brazil? So actually it's a question for me. I don't think so, Inez, because this is what I hear from students. I think in a general realm, perhaps, in theory, because we have all these studies on English as a lingua franca, we have decoloniality, etc. I think among researchers, we are beyond, but we are not beyond with student teachers. This is what they tell us. And Suellen is nodding her head because she just finished her student and now her study, and I was in the committee, and I read this in her students' histories or stories or talk. So they are still with these beliefs about how I sound, how I should sound. If you want to say something, Suellen. And then we have more questions here, but do you want to comment, Suellen, or anything? I guess not. She has something there. But anyway, so the other questions were, let me go here. Saraiva Jr. said, I would like you to talk a little bit about how the values adopted by a community impact emotions, the ways of expressing them, and the discourses about it, and how we as teachers can deal with this. You want to repeat the question?
Great, yes, please.
Sorry, I read it too fast. I would like you to talk a little bit about how the values adopted by a community impact emotions, the ways of expressing them, and the discourses about it, and how we as teachers can deal with this.
Right. I think that's also a good comment and a question. So, we are talking about school-related policy and so on, but what about the community, right? So the school is a part of the community, and of course, the community's norms and expectation influence what teachers do, like through the Japan example, the parents' expectation. And also the cultural norms that influence. So, for example, going back to Korean teachers example, the teachers or parent community cultural norms expect teacher to know everything, so have to have answer for everything, and then should have a superior skills than any student in the classroom. That, of course, influence teachers' emotional experiences. What do we need to do about it? Well, in a given context, we kind of follow the feeling rules. We don't want it to violate cultural, emotional norms unless that's unfair, and then that kind of will limit our practices. So if there's a kind of conflict and we cannot perform our job the way we wanted to, we consider effective, then we have to think about the where those norms are coming from. Is that just because of tradition or cultural norms, or is there something really valuable, actually valuable, so that it can benefit teachers and students and then the entire community, kind of thing? So we have to think about it. So
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Right. So it's in terms of a community, we are thinking about not only English teaching. So my experience here. So I don't know whether bilingualism is common in Brazil or not. So here I'm kind of an immigrant here in the U.S. So the community here, minority immigrant, I have my first language. And in a way, the community here, they expect me to speak perfect English, but at the same time, they expect me to teach my L1 Korean to my daughter. So that's kind of a, catch-22, right? So I have to speak perfect English, and then my daughter should speak perfect English, but at the same time, she is Korean American, then she is expected to speak Korean well enough so that you are immigrant. So that's sort of a pressures and expectation for us to have this strong desire for Korean maintenance that of course influence. Then we're thinking about where does that come from? Why we only as a minority to maintain another language? What about you guys? Why you don't learn other languages? So when we think about that, well, right. So that's kind of in a way power, right? So you're a minority, you have to do additional language maintenance, and English is the norm. So probably we have less pressure to learn other foreign languages. So I think that's somewhat related to community
Yes.
expectations.
Yes, thank you very much. There is another question here from Professor Regina Alou. She said, do you see these studies or research reaching teachers in schools? What kind of changes have you seen taking place?
Are you talking about the research that I have done with my student teacher?
I
Right.
think the research on emotions, I guess, right? Or
Right.
yeah, the research that you have done.
The example study that I talked about, Song and Valentine 2024. My student, she is an ESL teacher. She's kind of a new ESL teacher. So she talked about collaboration was really hard. So we really look into her experiences, why she felt that this way. And then we talk about what are the most challenges she experienced when she was working with a teacher. And then after her critical reflection, she kind of recognized what is the most difficult thing she can deal with, and then how she can avoid that context, how she can improve that situation that cause so much emotional labor. So instead of waiting background, right? So she can be more proactive, talking to her principals, or she has a kind of a early planning, share with all the teachers, so that the teachers are aware of what she's planning. So in a way, so we kind of come up with a kind of action plan that reduce that sort of emotional hurts, emotional struggles, alleviate the situation that, right.
Yes, well, thank you. And the same professor, she asked, do you know how these studies have been included in the curriculum of language undergraduate courses, if they have been included?
Right.
On emotional labor, emotion management. Right. I guess.
Right. So those studies that I conducted, I think those are with a graduate student, because I wanted to work with a language teacher because they are teaching on the side. I think one good way to incorporate those reflective practices is during practicum and internship. So when you do the internship, you all have an internship component, right? So for those teacher training. So the last semester, student teacher, they go to school and then they do kind of an internship teaching. I think each teacher education program has that component. So in the internship practices, teachers, those are student teachers, they always reflect. They have an assignment, daily reflection. But then their daily reflection always focus on skill development. From there, we can include those reflective question about their emotion and emotional well-being. That's a way we can incorporate emotion and then cognition, like knowledge and the skill development all together in a way, without like a separate like a course.
Right. Thank you. And then there is one question by Professor Sandra Gatolin, de São Paulo State. She said, can you say about the relationship between emotions, emotion labor, and assessment? Are there specific studies which focus on it?
I'm not very familiar with assessment per se, but I think the Mustafa Nazari, he did emotion labor and assessment, and then he published that article in TESOL Quarterly. So you can search it for Nazari. He was the first speaker,
Yes.
and he did specifically emotion labor and assessment, published very recently, either 2023, 2024 in TESOL Quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yes.
Iranian context.
Yes, Mustafa Nazari, yes, he was the first speaker, and his talk is recorded on the FORPROLI channel on YouTube, okay? I have to step out a little while, but Giza has some questions for you, Julian.
Okay, Gian. Well, there's I've got some questions, but there are other questions here on the chat, but I would like to ask you something before reading the question, because there's something you mentioned in this article entitled Critical Approach to Emotions of Non-Native English-Speaking Teachers, in a page that you say that researchers suggest that the teacher's emotions can be ameliorated through activities and skills. Do you think emotions can be ameliorated?
Emotion can be
ameliorated, make better.
Better.
Yeah, because
right.
I was surprised when I read that, because how can we make emotions better?
We feel better? Teacher can feel better? Is that what you're saying?
No, what you say in the text is exactly that some researchers pointed out that emotions can be ameliorated through activities and skills. Do you believe it's possible? Because it's not your opinion, it's what you pointed out about researchers' opinions.
So other researchers consider skill development could improve emotions?
No, what you say is, sorry, let me get the page just to read exactly what is written. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's on page 456, but it says, some researchers and educators consider emotions something that can be ameliorated through activities that enhance teaching strategies and skills.
Right. So that means like many researchers think that emotion reflect the teacher's skills and strategy, right? So emotion and the skill strategy, some other scholar, they consider emotion reflect skill. That means if you feel bad, then that reflect you have a lack of a skill set, which is not always true. Going back to the Korean English teachers example, they're a good teacher, but still experience that emotion, anxiety, and the feeling of inferiority, right? So those kind of emotion actually do not directly reflect teachers' lack of a skill or a lack of confidence. That's, I think, what this critical approach is about. Emotions are not directly reflecting lack of, skill. So, for example, me, even I go to the professional conferences, I feel very anxious when I have to another scholars who I consider very respectable. I don't know where does this emotion coming from, but I still feel this a little me, you know what I mean? Always a little me that limit my interaction to other scholar, and then but that my emotion does not reflect my skill or actual skill or knowledge, right? I have it there, but still it's a kind of separate issues sometimes. So um, skill development, right? Okay, help a little bit the emotional aspect, but then we cannot say, okay, you have a negative emotion, so you have a negative skill. We cannot say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what I was questioning was the fact that you pointed out that some researchers say that we can make emotions better. And that's what I was trying to understand, because how can we make emotions better? We can deal with them in a better way, react
Right,
to them, right?
right. So we
So,
can just deal with the source of emotion, right? Source. So
mm-hmm,
so I thought about this a lot. So when I was teaching, sometimes I felt terrible. After teaching, I came home. I feel like something didn't go well. I felt very bad that day. And then I just think about what bothered me the most. Sometimes some attitude, some students' attitude. I mean, I'm okay with it.
mm-hmm,
Learning, it's okay. But then some students' attitude really, really bothers me. And I was thinking, why that bothers me so much? I can just let it go like they are a student, but it bothers me because it kind of shake me because my identity,
mm-hmm,
because I care about that so much. And then
yeah,
even if that's a kind of challenging who I am, it's bothering me. So kind of I understand that. Then next time that happens, I can address that situation better, or something like that. That's a way we can also deal with it. But then some emotions are also, related to teacher skill. New teachers, sometimes they lack of a skill, lack of experiences that influence their emotion too. So it's a kind of very complex. The second case, probably we can, the teacher may have more desirable emotional experiences when they improve that skill or have a better experiences. So sometimes skill influence emotional experience.
emotion. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes do not, right? So that's what we're talking about. It's not always clear cut. It's just a complex,
Mm-hmm. Really complex. Yeah,
sticky,
but
sticky.
but something you said that led me to another question. It's because when you said that you felt bad, yeah, sometimes we feel bad about that, and sometimes we engage in emotional labor or simply suffer. Do you think that's when something happens to you like this? A student responded in an inappropriate or in an indelicate way, do you think that we tend to engage immediately in emotional labor, or we start suffering? Because there is a huge difference between suffering and engaging into emotional labor, right? Because you suffer when you have when you engage in the emotional labor, but when you just suffer and say something and you express your ideas and your feelings, it's different, right?
Right. But Suffering. I don't
or
know.
feel anxious,
Right.
just feeling anxious.
Suffering is a, I don't know, part of emotion labor, probably, right? I mean, could it be part of emotion labor because you suffer because you cannot express your emotion directly, right? So that in a way you engage emotion labor. You try to suppress that emotion because that's not
Mm-hmm.
you cannot yell at your student. You are not allowed to do that. Um, but then, what do you do after you are suffering? You just suffer and suppressing your feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of that lead to you never talk about your emotion. That's a teacher isolation. You know what I mean? You just keep it yourself, and then you're not happy about your work, right? Dissatisfaction.
Yeah,
But
I mentioned, sorry, but I mentioned this because I and other people who were attending our conference, we are members of a group of exploratory practice. And in this group, we have some principles that we have to discuss with the students and learners about the way we feel. So sometimes, because of these principles of working, that we have a freedom to talk to students about the way we feel. We sometimes don't engage in emotional labor, but we feel anxious, we feel disappointed.
right.
So it's something cultural and part of a way of teaching.
Right. I think it's also cultural too, right? Some culture, it's expressing emotion. You're direct, right? Sometimes, um, I don't know, not process the emotion is not allowed in the classroom, right? But then some culture, that's a part of
Mm-hmm.
building relationship with a student. You just kind of sometimes share
Mm-hmm.
your emotion, right? So why you are disappointed today. Uh, um, but I would be careful about, even though you can share emotion, that emotional sharing should be think about, in a way, how this will affect the relationship. Um, Not like a low emotion. I'm just upset, I'm just,
No.
uh, in order to do that, you have to kind of understand why you feel this way, and then you share with the student. I'm
Mhm,
upset because your lack of attendance, because I worry about that may
mhm.
negative learning outcome, something like that, right? So I don't know, your principle sounds very good.
Wow. So it's just the idea of asking why, always searching for understanding.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Giza. Thank you very much. We have some more questions here, and these will be the last ones. These are questions from master students here at my university. They are actually my advisees. Pamela Rabelo, she is investigating shyness because this is often seen as a negative trait for teachers. And in Brazil, the extroversion traits are seem to be more valued. So she thinks that
Mhm,
this perception may impact teachers' emotions and self-esteem, which may lead them to mask their shyness and its emotional effects. So she wanted to know if you could talk about how shyness is perceived in teachers in countries like Korea or USA, and what's the role of emotional labor in these contexts.
Wow, okay, that's a very interesting topic. I really like that, her approach to shyness. Yes, I didn't think about that, but I always talk to my student like this. So, whenever we talk about language acquisition theory, so we're talking about who are the best language learners, outgoing, extrovert, introverted, raise your hand and stuff. Then I ask a student, and what do you think? What do you think of me? Do you think I'm introverted or extroverted? they always told me that I sound very extroverted. And then I told them, no, I'm not extroverted. I'm introverted. I have no problem staying by myself 24/7. I don't have to interact with anyone. Then they look at me. Wow, you're the way you talk, you're making joke, and you're very extroverted. Well, this is a performance for you. I'm doing it for you, right? So I'm kind of in a way, I don't know, I'm mixed in a way, but I used to be very, very shy. I cannot do this kind of talk because I'm very nervous and shy. But what is expected, as you said, especially American culture, uh, teacher have to really engage, right, and build a relationship with the student, outreach. So this is kind of made up personality, teacher personality for me. So I think the topic is very interesting. How the different expectation of the teacher and the teacher's own personality, and then that leads to some kind of emotional struggle here. I kind of figured out how I do it, like a back and forth performing, but then this would be very difficult for the new teacher, how they adopt and navigate this cultural expectation. Some students may not be very excited, but teachers are not excited. And it takes some time. But also, if there's a too much outgoing, certain introverted student who don't like it, it's too much for them. So teachers have to be very sensitive to student needs as well. So that's a great topic.
Yes, thank you so much. And the other question is related to native speakerism. Fernanda Gea, she is researching native speakerism, and she would love if you could say something about emotional vulnerability related to native speakerism.
Emotional vulnerability and native speakerism.
Yes.
Right. Emotional vulnerability is very similar in a way to emotional labor, because the scholar talks about two aspects of emotional vulnerability, the same as emotional labor. For emotional labor, it may lead to negative outcome, teacher isolation, but also provide an opportunity for teacher to reflect and then, transform, right? So emotional vulnerability is the same way. It's a vulnerable, right? Vulnerable, and but at the same time, when you look into your vulnerability, oftentimes you can find something. So it's a multi-dimensional emotion. So for the native speakerism, as a non-native speakers, mentally we always think that okay, we are equal, we are fine. I speak English okay. However, right, emotionally, I mean, we cannot control emotion, isn't it, right? So mentally, it's okay. Emotionally, always we are kind of feeling small and we shrink, and then always vulnerable. But through this critical engagement with your on the emotion, this vulnerability can provide a way to challenge the native speakerism. So it's kind of complex, but it's kind of for role of a vulnerability. Vulnerable, that means you can raise your sensitivity. Vulnerable means you can raise your sensitivity. If there's no vulnerability, you are not sensitive to it, but you are vulnerable. So you're always sensitive to that aspect that lead to somewhere, right? Lead you to somewhere. So that's a dual aspect.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then the last question, and then after that I will just say some comments that were posted on YouTube, and we we're going to end this wonderful talk, unfortunately, because it's just a wonderful talk. We could be here, you know, talking for a longer time. But anyways, Cynthia said, I've been curious about teacher entrepreneurs and their emotions as they deal with teaching itself and other things like content creation and business things. Do you know if the concept of emotional labor have been connected to this context, has been connected?
Entrepreneurship, right? So
yes, teachers
about,
being online and being teachers
right,
and entrepreneurs.
that's
and,
a very interesting aspect. I think me and another scholar from Iran, so we collaborate on the Iranian language teachers self-branding on Instagram, you know, social media. I think that's very close to what you know, this person is asking. So in the social media, how teachers show themselves as a, you know, language teacher, right? Showing kind of a fancy video, you know, material, and then also showing all kind of a luxury lifestyle. Lifestyle is a thing, isn't it? You know, so teaching is not only teaching anymore on social media or this entrepreneurship, right? So it's like a business. So you have to do a lot other things, and how that influence those who are actually following the trend, also how that influence who do not follow the trend. That's a kind of two aspect, right? Those who follow the trend, of course, they always have to update every single day, every single moment. That's a lot of emotional pressures. But then also those who are not following the trend. So we interview those who are not following the trend or reluctant to follow a little bit, but not like fully engaging that, you know, that sort of a self-branding, you know, trend. They suffer so much, you know, what they're doing is not right, wrong, you know, but at the same time, they feel vulnerable because they're doing it, they're attracting so many students, and then what I feel this is right, but then, you know, not many students are interested in what I do, you know, what I believe is a good teaching. So there are a lot of, you know, those kind of vulnerability. So you know, my articles, if you are interested in that article, it's a TESOL Quarterly 2024. My co-author Hassan, he's in Hong Kong. He continued to work on this, and we our first article we talk about social media and self-branding. Oh yeah, so also we have another article, TESOL Journal, consumerist discourse, you know, how this you know, language teaching is just selling, you know, product, how the consumerist discourse influence language teachers identity and emotion. We just published it with the TESOL Journal too, so you can find the TESOL Quarterly and TESOL Journal. You can search my name. Also, right now we are working on what teacher considers professional, you know, professionalism in those platform-based language teaching, you know, how that influence language teachers' emotions. It's a struggle.
Wonderful, wonderful. We might have to ask you for those articles because our university do not, we do not, I mean, there's no money to pay for TESOL Quarterly, TESOL Journal. They are all paid. It's not free for us, so we don't have access to them. But thank you very much for your answers. And there are a lot of compliments to your talk here. Everybody saying, you know, wonderful talk, congratulations, thank you, very insightful, great talk, thanks, wonderful talk, thanks a lot, great talk, wonderful talk, thank you, John Yoon Sang, your work helped me a lot, and I'm sure there are many more there, but we are getting to the, you know, the ending of this event, and I want to thank you so much, Juyang, for your time, for your excellent exchange here with us. We feel so appreciative of your time and your knowledge, and we wish we could, continue talking to you, and we hope we can continue our collaboration. It would be wonderful if we could do something together. There are lots of Brazilian researchers who are working on emotions, and we read your work and we admire your work so much. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and then thank you for joining me, and then thank you for all the wonderful comments. I hope you are not engaging in emotional labor, giving me that positive comments.
Not at all. Not at all.
I don't want you to do, and thank you. And yeah, I'd love to collaborate and learn about all those new studies that teachers shine. That's a wonderful topic. One of your advisees, and thank you so much for having me, and great discussions.
Thank you. Yes, great discussion indeed. And I'm gonna give Jivan the word, but I'm gonna let him close this event. But before I do so probably our next speakers, we are still going to confirm this in our social media, but it's probably going to be Dr. Richard Sampson from Japan, Dr. Luis Javier Penton Herrera, and Dr. Richard Butler from Chile, but we are still working out the details and the dates, but stay tuned in our Instagram account, FORPROLI, for these dates and guests, okay? So, Jivan.
All right, thank you, Ana. Once again, thank you, Juyang, for the brilliant presentation. So on behalf of GPLA and LET and FORPROLI team, I would like to thank everyone who was here on the channel again. And do not forget to follow us on our social networks, FORPROLI.UFSB and LET, Linguagem, Ensino e Trabalho. And please, thumbs up this video here on the channel and share it with anyone who may be interested in the topic. We hope to see you soon again, and thank you guys. So bye.
Thank you. Should I disconnect now or should I stay?